contracts and billing, and I'll kind of walk through quickly the way that it works. So I added a client here, and then I can go through and I can create a project, and I can call this product design, and I can specify a rate, and create this project. And then once I have this project, I can add a contract. So let's see, I can say add contract, and I'm just going to select from a bunch of templates, and I'm going to call it UX design, and I'll say create contract. And then it's going to put me into this like kind of like Mad Lib style editor where I can say, okay, like this is the name of my company. I'm based in the US. You know, my client is a company or a person or whatever. I say continue, and I could say being hired to do whatever, like wireframes and visual design, and continue. They're going to pay me $200 an hour, like blah, blah, blah. And then I say continue. And then I can sign the contract. I think it's loading here. Oh. I can sign the contract. Okay. No, don't create invoices, create contract. And then here it is. And this is a contract that's been used like by thousands of freelancers and companies, and it's been like tested in court across, I think, all 50 states. It's a very, very good contract, and I can sign it and then send it. And the client will then get it, they can review it, they can sign it, and then now we are engaged. We have a legally binding contract. So I will uphold my end of the bargain. Let's see, I think it might have gone to spam. No. All right, well, you get the idea. This is how I like have made my living for 5 years, you know, like it's, and even though I've never had to like use this contract, the fact that it exists and that we each have the recourse of like US courts and we're each protected by LLCs, it massively like reduces the risk of transacting. And when I think about like, okay, well, how do I do that with a DAO right now? Like there really isn't any way for us to transact without one of us taking on the risk of either not getting the work that's promised or not getting the funds that's promised in exchange for the work. The way that I've solved this in my case recently was they just paid me up front, and that's fine, that's great. That, but it's still like, and it wasn't for a ton of money, but I imagine what if it was? What if it was like an order of, what if the contract value of that project was like an order of magnitude more? Are they gonna send me like 6 figures? You know, like probably they're not. So if they're not registered as an LLC in the US or as some legal entity in some country, then how do we protect ourselves? And so far as I know, there isn't really an answer to this. There's a hack kind of, which is that actually a lot of DAOs are registered as LLCs. And the bylaws of those docs basically say that they essentially act as a kind of pointer to what happens on chain. They say like, you know, this organization will operate according to what's specified over here being like what's on chain. But that just feels kind of like a kludgy sort of hack. So something I've been thinking about is if DAOs are this sort of like internet native LLC or like an internet native company, then like it follows that there should also be all of the infrastructure that currently exists that allow companies to transact, that there should also be internet native versions of those as well. And so as I was thinking through that, I kind of started thinking through some different flows and like how you would be able to do that. So I'm going to zoom in and kind of walk through these, but basically what we're looking at is there's like 5 different participants in this transaction. There's the client, there's the contractor, there's a client nominated mediator, a contractor nominated mediator, and a judge, and they all kind of converge. And so I'm going to walk through like what each of those flows are. And just to kind of caveat this, like this is very rough. Like these are ideas that like are still in the kind of nascent stages. I plan to kind of work on this more, think through it more, and then eventually kind of like design like actual like UIs and then probably build out like a front end prototype. But for now, it's still very much in this like idea phase. Like this kind of like happened to me like a week and a half ago. So I got really excited and started thinking through it, but it's still pretty rough. So anyway, the first step here from the contractor's point of view is that they would use this tool, they would create a client, they would create a project kind of nested underneath that client. The project would have a contract, and then they would nominate a mediator. They would say, in the event that there's a disagreement, this is the person who I defer to resolve that disagreement. From the perspective of the company, they would effectively do the exact same thing. They would create a new vendor. There would be a project in which they hire that vendor. There would be a contract for that project. They would then nominate a mediator, and then they would sign it. And then the next sort of step here would be, if you're the contractor mediator, you receive nomination, like you've been nominated, you accept that nomination. You then, as the mediator, say, well, in the event that myself and my counterparty mediator can't arrive at a conclusion, then we're going to nominate a judge. And then the mediator would then sign the contract, and then the client mediator would again go through the same exact flow. They would receive the nomination from the company. They would accept it. They would agree with their counterparty on who that judge should be. And then they would sign the contract. And then finally, the judge would receive the nomination. One step that I missed is that, well, I'll come back to it. So they receive the nomination, they accept the nomination, they sign the contract, and now all parties have like agreed on, okay, this entity and this entity are going to transact on these terms. And in the event of a dispute, these are the 2 parties that will mediate. And if those 2 parties can't agree, then there's this judge who will kind of make a final decision. So these are the steps. I'll kind of read through them. So I kind of already read through one. Suppose that in the event of a disagreement, the contractor and the company would each make a case for their side of the story. Those cases would be reviewed by the mediators, who would then publish a decision. All this would happen on chain. They would be compensated for the time that they put in out of the funds sitting in escrow. That was the step that I missed earlier, that the company would put funds into escrow in order for the project to get greenlit and to start. So in the event that you need mediators, they're getting paid for their time and adjudication with the funds sitting in escrow. And then in the event that they can't agree, the decision would go to a judge, and the judge would make a decision. And in this way, it's like a pretty much entirely peer-nominated, on-chain process by which messy, fuzzy human disagreements can be resolved. And so I think in most cases, you would never need any of this. But knowing that it exists, and no, and in the rare event that you would, I think it reduces a lot of risk between people that want to transact. So and also too, it doesn't rely on the like the physical jurisdiction of any one court. It could happen, like each of the participants in this transaction could be distributed like globally. So anyway, that's kind of the idea. If this is interesting to you and you want to chat more about it, let me know. This is something I'm going to be working on over the next few weeks and trying to make more progress on. So that's it. Yeah.
So one thing that I think would be interesting, be curious, we can talk more about this later, but the general idea is like in blockchain, like a general pattern of challenging blockchains, you have to do a lot of optimizing for worst case scenarios, and there's a huge amount of efficiency between that and like expected case scenario. This is like obviously a big step in the direction of trying to make it easier for people to optimize around the expected case scenario. I'm wondering, like, what I think would be really interesting is like something that's even simpler than this would just be this notion of like staking some sort of arbitrary token, not even like a valuable token, but the idea is that if either party is unhappy with the agreement, they can like revoke something about it. And so then you can just really look at somebody and be like, do they have an outstanding like revoked token or something of that sort? And the idea here is, it's a bit crude because sometimes a dispute, and that's where you've already focused on, is like, well, what do you do if there is a dispute? But if you assume that like in a lot of interactions, you're just like pretty confident it's going to work fine, you really just need like the simplest way that there's like some sort of recourse, right? And I feel like just even some sort of standard, even though standards often create more problems than they solve, but it's like the first step would just be this like standard for indicating that you want it to work together and making it easy for somebody to publicly indicate that it didn't go well. Have you thought about have you thought about that, or ways that you can maybe bootstrap by just getting some people to agree to use some sort of standard, or even with your own clients, like, hey, I'm publicly announcing that here's a contract, both me and my client or vice versa are like plugged in, and we both have the ability to like indicate something about it, and that's sort of like gets the ball rolling, because I think the mediation stuff is always going to be hard.
Yeah,
it'll be solved eventually, but
yeah,
like, that to me would already enable the case where people just want to take a little bit more risk. It'll be a total shit show, frankly, if people don't agree. But that's
yeah,
going to be the case. And I still think 90% of the time they will be fine, and this will just like grease the skids a little bit for those kinds of interactions.
Yeah, I think that you're touching on like an aspect to this, but is I think a separate thing, which is like reputation. So like if two people transact, they both say stake, and then someone says, well, hey, I'm gonna like withdraw from this pool, and that withdrawal is an indication that I had a bad experience with this party. So that acts as a kind of like, strike against their reputation. But it does not address the issue of like either someone not getting paid or someone not getting the work they paid for. And that like really messy, complex, very human problem is what I want to solve. Because like you're like, it'll get solved eventually. That's like my thinking too. And so the question is like, well, why shouldn't I try to solve it? I think reputation is a huge factor for all parties involved, like for the judge, for the mediators, and then of course for like the people that are transacting. Sweet.